The cameras were never meant to spy on betrayal. They were meant to protect a father's worst fear. In a quiet, guarded mansion where money could buy anything except peace, a billionaire made a decision he never told anyone about. Not his staff, not his friends, not even his own daughter. Hidden cameras were installed in the corners of hallways, near doors, and in shared spaces, not to control, but to watch over the one person he could not afford to lose. His daughter lay in a wheelchair, her body fragile after an accident that changed everything. She could no longer walk, and some days she barely spoke. To him, she was no longer just his child. She was his responsibility, his guilt, and his reason to stay awake at night. The billionaire had enemies, business rivals, people who smiled in public and plotted in private. And when his daughter became vulnerable, fear followed him everywhere. He trusted no one completely. Not the doctors who came and went. Not the nurses with perfect resumes. And certainly not the new maid who arrived quietly one morning, eyes lowered, voice soft, background unclear. She was hired to clean, to cook, to help with small tasks. Nothing more, or so he thought. From his office, late at night, the billionaire would review the security footage. Most of it was boring. Long stretches of silence. Staff moving in and out. His daughter sitting near the window, staring at the garden like she was searching for a life she used to have. But one evening, something felt off. The footage showed the maid entering his daughter's room at an unusual hour. There was no scheduled cleaning, no call for assistance, just the maid closing the door behind her. At first, he assumed it was nothing, maybe a misunderstanding, maybe kindness. But then he kept watching. The maid didn't tidy the room. She didn't adjust a wheelchair or call a nurse. Instead, she sat down in front of his daughter and did something no one else ever did. She spoke to her differently, not like a patient, not like a broken girl, but like a human being who still mattered. The billionaire leaned closer to the screen as the moments unfolded. What he saw next made his heart race. The maid's actions were careful, deliberate, and completely unexpected. There was no cruelty, no greed, yet something about it felt powerful, dangerous even. It challenged everything he believed about control, protection, and trust. His finger hovered over the pause button, torn between anger and confusion. Was this a threat, a secret plan, or something far more unsettling? As the footage continued, one truth became clear. The cameras meant to protect his daughter had just revealed something that could change all their lives forever. And he wasn't sure he was ready for what came next. The billionaire paused the footage, but the image stayed burned into his mind. His daughter's face looked different in that moment, more awake, more present. For months, she had moved through the days like someone trapped behind glass, responding only when spoken to, nodding when asked simple questions. Doctors called it trauma. Therapists called it slow recovery. He called it his failure. Watching the screen now, he felt something shift in his chest, a mix of hope and fear he didn't want to admit. His daughter's accident had changed the entire household. Once filled with laughter and noise, the mansion had become quiet, careful, almost afraid of itself. Every step was softer, every conversation guarded. He had spent millions on treatments, equipment, specialists flown in from around the world. Nothing seemed to bring her back to the girl she used to be. And the more helpless she became, the more controlling he grew. The cameras were his way of holding on, of believing he could still protect her from harm. The maid, whose name was rarely spoken aloud, had been working there for only a few weeks. Her file was thin, too thin for his liking. A few references, a past job she left suddenly. No clear family ties listed. He had approved her hiring during one of his distracted days, trusting his manager's judgment. Now, watching her on the screen, he wondered what he had missed. Why did she move with such confidence around his daughter, as if she understood something no one else did? The footage continued to play. The maid knelt to be eye level with the wheelchair, her voice too low for the camera to catch clearly. But the billionaire noticed small details. The way his daughter's hands slowly unclenched. The way her eyes followed the maid's movements. These were things even trained professionals had failed to achieve. It unsettled him. Kindness, when unexpected, could be just as dangerous as cruelty. Memories surfaced that he had buried deep. The night of the accident, the phone call, the hospital lights, his daughter asking him, in a broken whisper, why she couldn't feel her legs. He had promised her everything would be okay, even though he didn't know if that was true. Since then, he had relied on money and control to keep his fear at bay. But this moment, captured by a hidden camera, was slipping beyond both. He leaned back in his chair, listening to the quiet hum of the monitors. Was the maid crossing a line? Was she manipulating his daughter's emotions? Or was she offering something the rest of them never had? Real connection? The uncertainty made his stomach tighten. He considered calling security, ordering her removal, ending the risk before it grew. But something stopped him. A part of him wanted to keep watching, to understand what he was seeing before acting. Down the hall, unaware of the eyes watching her, the maid stood and gently placed something in his daughter's hand. The object was small, ordinary, impossible to identify from the angle of the camera. Yet his daughter looked at it like it meant everything. Her lips moved, forming words he hadn't seen her speak in weeks. The billionaire reached for the volume control, his pulse pounding. Whatever was happening in that room was no longer just about safety. It was about secrets, trust, and a past he didn't fully understand. And deep down, he sensed that once he learned the truth about the maid, there would be no turning back. The billionaire did not sleep that night. He sat alone in his office, the glow of the screens reflecting in tired eyes that had seen too much and trusted too little. He replayed the footage again and again, stopping at different moments, studying the maid's expressions, her body language, the careful way she spoke to his daughter. Nothing about her actions looked careless or rushed. If anything, she seemed intentional, as if every word and movement carried weight. That frightened him more than open defiance ever could. The next morning, he watched from a distance as the household followed its usual routine. Doctors arrived, nurses checked vitals, assistants moved quietly through the halls. His daughter responded as she always did, polite, distant, guarded. But when the maid entered the room, something changed. It was subtle, almost invisible, but to a father who had memorized every sign of his child's pain, it was impossible to ignore. Her shoulders relaxed. Her gaze lifted. She looked present. From the maid's side, the world inside the mansion felt heavy. She knew she was being watched, not by cameras she could see, but by the silence itself. Rich houses always carried secrets, and this one carried grief. She had noticed it on her first day. The way people avoided the daughter's eyes, the way kindness was offered like a duty instead of feeling. The maid didn't see a billionaire's child. She saw a young woman trapped inside a body that no longer obeyed her, surrounded by people too afraid to treat her like she still mattered. The object she had placed in the girl's hand the night before had been simple. Something personal. Something from a past life. She had taken a risk bringing it out, knowing it might raise questions. But she also knew that healing didn't always come from machines or money. Sometimes it came from being seen, from being understood. And that understanding had a history the billionaire knew nothing about. Meanwhile, doubts began to spread among the staff. Whispers followed the maid down hallways. A nurse mentioned that the daughter had asked for her by name. A therapist noted small improvements, but couldn't explain why. The security chief flagged unusual behavior, without evidence of wrongdoing. All of it landed on the billionaire's desk, feeding the growing conflict inside him. Protect or observe. Act or wait. Every instinct told him to take control, yet something deeper urged caution. He began ordering background checks, quietly digging into the maid's past. What he found only deepened the mystery. Gaps in records. A name change years ago. A connection to a place linked to his daughter's life before the accident. None of it was enough to accuse her of anything, but it was too much to ignore. It felt like fate tightening its grip, pulling threads together whether you wanted it or not. His daughter, unaware of the storm forming around her, held on to the small sense of normal the maid brought. Their conversation stayed private, their meaning hidden behind gentle smiles and quiet moments. For the first time in months, she felt like someone believed she was still whole, even if her body said otherwise. And that belief was dangerous, because it made her hope. As the cameras continued to record, The billionaire realized he was no longer just watching for threats. He was watching for answers. Every second of footage raised new questions about trust, control, and the cost of protection. Whatever the maid was doing was changing his daughter. And soon, he would have to decide whether that change was something to fear or something he'd been denying all along. The tension inside the mansion grew thicker with each passing day. It settled into the walls, followed people from room to room, and refused to leave the billionaire's mind. He watched the monitors less like a guardian now and more like a man standing at the edge of a truth he wasn't ready to face. Every interaction between the maid and his daughter felt charged, as if time slowed when they were together. Nothing dramatic happened, yet everything felt like it was moving towards something unavoidable. His investigation into the maid's past continued quietly. Phone calls were made. Old contacts were reached. Pieces of information surfaced, then disappeared again. One former employer described her as too involved. Another said she left without explanation after forming a strong bond with someone she was hired to care for. None of it proved wrongdoing, but it painted a picture that made the billionaire uneasy. He wondered if kindness, unchecked, could turn into control, or if his fear was blinding him to something he should have seen long ago. The cameras captured a moment one afternoon that nearly pushed him to act. His daughter, struggling with frustration, dropped an object from her lap. A nurse rushed in to help, speaking quickly, professionally. The girl turned her face away, shutting down. Minutes later, the maid entered. She didn't rush. She didn't speak at first. She simply sat beside the wheelchair and waited. Slowly, his daughter's breathing eased. The maid guided her hands, not forcing, not correcting, just supporting. When the object was finally lifted, his daughter let out a quiet laugh, a sound the billionaire hadn't heard since before the accident. His chest tightened. That laugh felt like betrayal, not by the maid, but by himself. He had built walls, cameras, systems, all in the name of protection. Yet here was proof that control hadn't healed his daughter. Connection had, and that realization scared him more than any hidden motive ever could. The staff tension reached a breaking point. A senior nurse confronted management. The security chief demanded clarity. Was the maid overstepping her role? Was she influencing the patient emotionally? The billionaire listened without responding, his silence more unsettling than anger. He knew a decision was coming, and no choice would leave him untouched. That evening, the cameras revealed something different. The maid closed the door and spoke with urgency. His daughter's posture changed, her hands gripping the arms of the wheelchair. The maid handed her a folded paper. Whatever was written on it made the girl's eyes fill with tears, not of pain, but recognition. The billionaire stood abruptly, his heart pounding. This was no longer harmless kindness. This was something planned, something deeply personal. At the same time, his background check returned a final detail he hadn't been prepared for, a connection that tied the maid to his daughter's life before the accident in a way he never imagined. The past he thought was sealed off was standing right inside his home, speaking softly to his child. Down the hallway, his daughter made a request that stunned the staff. She wanted the maid present during her next medical session. The doctors hesitated. Protocols were questioned. The billionaire felt the walls closing in. Every path forward led to confrontation, and every secret seemed ready to surface at once. As the night deepened and the cameras kept recording, one truth became impossible to ignore. Whatever the maid was doing, it was about a force of reckoning. And when that moment arrived, the billionaire knew it would change not just his daughter's future, but the story he told himself about love, protection, and trust. The billionaire thought he had reached the edge of his fear, but the next discovery pushed him beyond it. Late that night, as rain tapped softly against the windows, he noticed something on the security feed that made his breath catch. One of the cameras had gone offline for exactly 7 minutes earlier that day. Not a malfunction, not a power issue, a manual interruption. Someone inside the house had known where the blind spot was. His first instinct was betrayal. His second was panic. Every protective measure he had put in place suddenly felt fragile. He replayed the surrounding footage, tracing movements frame by frame. Only one person passed through that corridor during the missing time. The maid. She walked calmly, without hesitation, as if she knew precisely where the camera coverage ended. The realization sent a chill through him. This was no longer just about emotional influence. This was about access. At the same time, his daughter's behavior began to change in ways that unsettled the staff. She asked questions she hadn't asked in months, about legal papers, about family history, about a sealed room in the East Wing that had been locked since the accident. When nurses tried to redirect her, she grew quiet, watching instead of responding. The maid remained close, saying little, but her presence seemed to steady the girl in moments of tension. The billionaire confronted his head of security, demanding answers. Could someone have tampered with the system? The response only deepened his worry. The security layout was customized. The blind spots were known only to a handful of people. Him, his chief of security, and the original caretaker assigned to his daughter before the accident. A caretaker who had disappeared from their lives without explanation. That name surfaced again in the report on the maid's past. Different name, same face. Older photos confirmed it. The woman he had hired to clean his home had once been part of his daughter's life in a far more intimate way. Not by coincidence, not by chance. She had returned. His mind raced with questions. Why now? Why after the accident? Was this about guilt, redemption, or something hidden beneath years of silence? Every answer felt dangerous. If the maid had come back for her personal reasons, what was she preparing his daughter for? And why did his daughter seem to trust her more with each passing hour? Another moment on the cameras made his heart stop. His daughter practiced standing with assistants, something the doctors had advised against without supervision. The maid stood close, ready to catch her, whispering encouragement. It was risky. It was against protocol. And yet, for a brief second, his daughter stood taller than she had since the accident. The image was powerful and terrifying. One wrong move could undo everything. The billionaire felt torn apart by two truths colliding. The maid might be a threat to his control, but she might also be the only one helping his daughter reclaim something he couldn't buy back with money. As trust and fear battled inside him, one final detail emerged that raised the stakes beyond anything he expected. A legal document, recently accessed, showed a change request tied to his daughter's care and guardianship. Someone had guided her to it. Someone had prepared her. The cameras didn't show who, but the timing was undeniable. As the mansion settled into uneasy silence, the billionaire realized the story unfolding was no longer his to manage quietly. The maid wasn't just challenging his rules. She was challenging his authority, his version of the past, and the future he believed he was protecting. And very soon he would have to face her, not as an employer, but as a father standing between control and truth. The confrontation happened sooner than anyone expected. The billionaire entered his daughter's room quietly, the camera still rolling, his heart pounding harder than it had in years. The maid was there, standing near the window, while his daughter sat upright in her wheelchair, calmer than he had ever seen her. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence carried everything: fear, suspicion, and truths waiting to break free. He spoke the maid's old name out loud, not the one on her file, but the one buried in records and memory. The room seemed to shrink. The maid didn't deny it. She simply nodded, her eyes steady, tired, and honest. She explained that she had been his daughter's caretaker years ago, before the accident, before the world collapsed into hospitals and guilt. She hadn't disappeared by choice. She had been dismissed quietly when she questioned decisions that placed image and speed above emotional care. The billionaire turned to his daughter, expecting confusion or fear. Instead, she met his gaze with strength he wasn't prepared for. She told him she had recognized the maid the moment she walked in. That familiar voice, that same patience. She had kept it secret because, for the first time since the accident, she felt safe being herself again. Not a patient, not a liability, just his daughter. The maid admitted she had studied the security layout, not to harm, but to create private moments without being watched. Moments where the girl could cry, laugh, and remember who she was without feeling monitored. The small object she had given her was a bracelet from years ago, one his daughter had lost the night of the accident. A reminder that she was more than what had happened to her. Anger and relief collided inside the billionaire. He realized the cameras he believed were protecting his daughter had also been suffocating her. The legal document she had accessed wasn't a rebellion. It was a request for shared decision-making over her care. She wanted a voice. She wanted dignity. The final test came when doctors arrived for the session she had requested the maid attend. The billionaire allowed it, watching closely, ready to stop everything. Under supervision, with calm guidance, his daughter attempted movement, not to prove anything, but to try. She didn't walk. She didn't stand alone. But she moved with purpose, confidence returning to her eyes. The room felt lighter, like something long frozen had finally cracked. The conflict resolved quietly. The maid was reinstated officially, this time with transparency. The cameras remained, but their presence changed. No longer hidden, no longer secret. Trust replaced control, and the mansion breathed again. But just as peace seemed to settle, one final revelation surfaced. In a private conversation, the maid shared something she had never told anyone. The accident that left his daughter paralyzed wasn't as random as everyone believed. There had been warnings, ignored signs, decisions made in haste that night. The billionaire stood still, the weight of that truth sinking deep. The story he had built to survive was incomplete. Protection had come too late. And now, as he looked at his daughter, stronger, awake, and finally speaking for herself, he knew the real journey wasn't about healing her body alone. It was about facing the past he had avoided. And the cameras, once meant to protect, had done something far more dangerous. They had revealed the truth. The days that followed were quieter, but not in the way the mansion had been before. This silence felt different. It wasn't heavy or fearful. It was a calm that comes after truth finally has space to exist. The billionaire spent more time outside his office, sitting with his daughter in the garden, listening instead of directing. For the first time since the accident, he stopped trying to fix everything and started trying to understand. The questions that had haunted him were slowly answered. The accident had been caused by rushed decisions and pressure, not fate. No one had meant for harm to happen, but responsibility could no longer be avoided. Accepting that truth was painful, yet freeing. It allowed him to release the guilt he had buried under money and control. He apologized to his daughter, not as a powerful man, but as a father who had been afraid of losing her. His daughter, now more involved in her own care, began to regain confidence. Her recovery did not suddenly transform into a miracle, but something more real happened. She laughed more. She spoke openly. She pushed herself when she felt ready, not when someone told her to. With a maid, now officially recognized as her caregiver again, she felt supported, not watched. The bond between them was built on trust, not secrecy, and that made all the difference. The cameras remained in place, but their purpose changed. They were no longer hidden tools of fear. They became part of a transparent system, agreed upon by everyone involved. Safety no longer came from surveillance alone, but from respect, communication, and shared responsibility. The billionaire learned that true protection wasn't about control. It was about creating space for dignity and choice. The staff noticed a change, too. The house felt warmer. Tension faded. Conversations became easier. The mansion stopped feeling like a guarded fortress and started feeling like a home again. Even the billionaire's business life shifted. He slowed down, choosing presence over constant pursuit, realizing that success meant little if the people he loved felt trapped by it. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the garden filled with soft light, his daughter asked him to sit beside her. She thanked him, not for the money, the doctors, or the security, but for finally seeing her. That moment stayed with him longer than any achievement ever had. The maid prepared to leave for the night, pausing at the doorway. The billionaire met her gaze and nodded. No words were needed. What had once been suspicion had turned into respect. She had returned not to disrupt their lives, but to restore something that had been lost long before the accident: human connection. As the cameras continued to record, they captured something simple and powerful. A father and daughter sitting together, talking freely, no fear in their voices. The billionaire understood then that the most shocking thing he had seen wasn't on a screen at all. It was a truth that healing begins when control ends, and when trust finally takes its place.